a lot of our students work full time. So, which is why I try and schedule it on lunch, not only because we have a lot of working students, but because we also have people from all over the world in our classes. So this seems to be a decent time. All right, hold on one sec. All right, so I think I'm gonna put the chat away and then share my screen. There it is, I think. And I'm just gonna play this. And we'll start with that. All right, guys, off we go.
Located on the shores of Taunton Bay in Franklin, Maine, the Center for Cooperative Aquaculture Research was founded in 1999 by the University of Maine. The site's history as an aquaculture facility began 10 years prior when it was used as a salmon hatchery. Over the past 20 years, millions of dollars have been invested to renovate and build new site infrastructure. At the center, we work cooperatively with industry, scientists, and other marine organizations to grow and improve the aquaculture business sector in Maine. The seawater pump house was constructed in 2005. We share this infrastructure with the USDA's National Coldwater Marine Aquaculture Center. It was engineered to supply the site with up to 1.27 million gallons per day of seawater. This building contains two 15-horsepower saltwater pumps and 5 sand filters. We have 3 water reservoirs on site, 2 for seawater and 1 for fresh. The building contains degassing pumps and UV sterilizers for water treatment. The 24,000 square foot multi-species Taunton Bay Marine Hatchery was constructed in 2005 and contains broodstock rooms, hatchery rooms, nursery and weaning systems, egg incubation rooms, and live feed labs. It also contains a 6,000-foot business incubator lab for research trials, training, and pilot-scale commercialization projects. Much of the hatchery is currently being used by Seacar industry partner Kingfish Maine to produce Pacific yellowtail while they develop their 90-acre site in Jonesport, Maine. Construction of the 18,650 square foot Maine Aquaculture Technology Lab was completed in 2013. But this building contains some of the remaining infrastructure from the original salmon farm. 2 365,000-gallon tanks were used as smolting tanks for salmon back in the 90s. The young salmon were held here while they acclimated to higher salinities before being moved out to net pens for grow out. Used as a startup space for new companies, the 11,500 square foot Maine Aquaculture Business Incubator has housed 2 businesses since the early 2000s. The first to use the space was Seabait Maine, a company that produced polychaete worms for the bait industry. It is currently being used by the second largest producer of marine ornamentals in the United States, Sea and Reef Aquaculture. With a mission to help reduce fishing pressure on the world's coral reefs by providing aquarium hobbyists with 100% captive bred marine ornamental fish, Sea and Reef Aquaculture was founded in 2003 by Soren Hansen. Converted from the original salmon hatchery, Our main office space contains a water quality lab, 2 aquaculture systems, and a teaching lab. Adjacent to this space is a large greenhouse, which contains 2 recirculating aquaculture systems. This space is currently occupied by CCAR industry partner American Unagi to grow out Maine's American glass eels to market size and provide its customers with a fully traceable product. Another remnant of the site's history as a salmon farm is the 2,800 square foot processing building, now our mariculture labs. It was constructed in 1995 as a HACCP certified fish processing space. It now serves as a macroalgae nursery, an invertebrate hatchery, a microalgae production space, and a microscope lab. We also use this space to produce feed for our larger broodstock species, like Atlantic halibut. Another CCAR industry partner, Springtide Seaweed, used this space while building their company into the largest organic seaweed farm in North America. They currently operate a seaweed nursery and processing facility in Goldsboro, Maine, and offer a variety of seaweed products. In 2005, the USDA's Agriculture Research Service began construction of the National Coldwater Marine Aquaculture Center. Co-located
Hey,
with
Jen.
the
Yeah.
2 facilities.
Oh, I think the video, people can't really see it. I thought it was just my internet, but it's just stuck on the title screen.
Really? Is that true, everyone?
Yeah, I think so from the chat.
Yeah.
Like
Just sent you a note.
discovering this.
Really?
I don't want them to have to watch that. title
No.
screen.
That's really weird because I'm seeing it.
Okay.
Hmm.
Yeah. Same with me.
Me too, yeah.
So no one's seeing it.
It
the
was
title
just the
screen.
title, yeah, just the title starting page.
And the great voiceover. No.
Oh,
Awesome
okay.
voiceover.
Okay, well, so you guys take the link for the video out of the
Here, I'll-
chat. And you can watch the video separately. And because I don't know how to fix that unless someone else can help me fix that, who's technically savvy as to why. Oh, well, some people were using the link, but we can kind of like maybe ask Melissa and Annie how the center works for them, how you evolve new projects. I kind of wanted to hear about the yellowfin myself. But maybe if you tell us, we start with like what you're currently growing there and what determines what you're growing there, and then we can kind of go from there.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I put the link for the long video and I'll put the link for the shorter video too.
Great.
The short video I think is like 3 to 4 minutes long.
I wonder if we should start by
the Center for
introducing
Cooperative
ourselves.
Aquaculture
Oh, yes, sorry. Yes, please introduce
Good idea,
yourself.
Annie.
Sorry about
You-
that.
I'm glad you joined us.
You go first, Melissa.
All right. Hi, everybody. It's nice to see you all. And I'm Melissa Malmstedt. I work at the Center for Cooperative Aquaculture Research. We are part of the University of Maine's Department of Industrial Cooperation, which that department is responsible for sharing our university resources with industry in Maine and encouraging the growth of different industries in Maine. The industry that we are focused on is aquaculture, and I'll talk more about that after that, but that's about it for me. Annie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi there. Thanks, Melissa. My name's Annie Langston Knoll, and I used to work with Melissa at the University of Maine, but I left the University of Maine in 2017, and I now work for the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Centre. And the University of Maine and the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Centre work closely together. What we have 2 business incubators, that we jointly manage. One is based at the Darling Marine Centre, which is a University of Maine field station, and one is based at the Centre for Cooperative Aquaculture Research, which is where Melissa works. So whilst we work together closely, we actually do different things. We're different organisations. So Melissa's going to tell you all about CCAR, the Centre for Cooperative Aquaculture Research. She can tell you a lot about kingfish and yellowtail. I've got other projects that I work on, and so I can talk about those as well if there's time and interest. The work that we do at MAIC ranges from workforce development projects through scallop hatchery work. We've got a bunch of different things that we do. I can tell you more about that at this time.
Great. Well, hopefully we'll have time for both of you to talk about what you're each doing and then also some questions. So. Great. Do you want to start, Melissa?
Yeah, sure. So the Center for Cooperative Aquaculture Research is located in Franklin, Maine. So it's about 45-minute drive from Bar Harbor, which is a real popular tourist destination. That might give you some reference. We are on the coast. We're about an hour from the main campus in Orono. This space has been continuously used for aquaculture since 1989. For the first 10 years, it was a privately owned salmon and Arctic char farm. And they unfortunately went out of business, but good for the university. They were able to take over this space and really invest a lot of time and money into building this into a premier large industry scale business incubator for the state of Maine for land-based aquaculture. So we primarily have three goals here. The first I just said is business incubation, which I'm not sure if everyone's heard of that term before, but what it is we help businesses get their start. We have all the infrastructure in place, permitting in place here for companies to come in. If they have an idea, they can test out their idea, bring investors in, get investment. And the goal is to eventually grow and hatch and graduate from this incubation, which we have had a business recently do. And we're really excited about that. I'll tell you about that in a bit. And then the second is to do education and outreach programming. So we run classes through here with MAIC, with the University of Maine, with other schools in the area, and training for industry. And then the last thing we do is research and development for the aquaculture industry in Maine, but not just in Maine, in the United States and the whole world. So we work on lots of different research projects that pertain to aquaculture here. We pull in all of our water that we need for our system. So this course, are you all familiar with aquaculture, land-based aquaculture? Where are we at?
Right. So this is the field trips are a combination of both my classes. One is the sustainable biology of aquaculture and the sustainable production. So hopefully they are somewhat aware of RAS-based systems as well as some ocean-based work as well, on top of shellfish and a little of seaweed.
Yeah, so we have a little bit of shellfish here. The University of Maine has another facility called the Darling Marine Center, and they do a lot of the bivalve work for the university. We have a sea urchin hatchery here. We also do macroalgae. So we have a macroalgae nursery and a sea urchin hatchery here. But our primary focus, what we're kind of known for, is finfish. We are really good at land-based, especially recirculating aquaculture systems, finfish production. So in the past, we've had Atlantic cod, Atlantic halibut, black sea bass, American eels, and more recently we have yellowtail kingfish. We also have marine ornamentals here on site. So, and most of these are grown in recirculating aquaculture systems. So these systems are nice because you can control all the environmental parameters. They're in buildings, in rooms. You can control the room temperature, the water temperature, the photo period, or the lighting for the fish. And you can pretty much grow anything in these systems. So we have tropical ornamental fish in We've had really cold water fish in the past. We have Atlantic salmon here currently. We're doing a restoration project with the Department of Marine Resources to help restore some of the salmon in 2 of Maine's rivers. And we do a lot of marine hatchery work. So marine fish have a different hatchery process than some freshwater fish do. They have pretty complex, usually pretty complex larval stages that we try to replicate in a lab here. And then also their diets when they're larval fish are pretty complicated. So we have to basically produce food for them to eat. So they need really small live food, typically in these early stages that they're attracted to eating. And we cultivate those little organisms and then we enrich them with the nutrients that the larval fish need. So they're like a little packet of nutrients that are attractive to the fish, and the fish will go after those. So all of this is incredibly intensive as far as staffing and work goes, and energy, honestly. And so you wanted to hear more about the yellowtail? Is that what you were interested
I did.
in?
I don't know if anyone else does. I'm sure someone on this call wants to hear more about the macroalgae. I've actually been there.
Okay, I'll tell you about the macroalgae and then I'll tell you about the yellowtail. So as far as our macroalgae goes, we had a big way we structure ourselves here as a business incubator. So everything is with an industry partner, a company that is located here for a bit of time and then eventually moves out into their own space. So we had a company called Springtide Seaweed. It's owned by a woman named Sarah Redman. And she started out here using our hatchery space or the nursery space for the macroalgae. And she has the largest organic seaweed farm in North America now. It's right up the road from us in Gouldsboro, Maine. And she's doing a great job. Really has her own suite of value-added products that she's selling to people. But in addition to that, is just selling bulk seaweed to other companies to make their products with. And Annie, you do some seaweed as well, don't you?
We do. So the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Centre, as I said, works closely with a range of organisations, including University of Maine and SECA, and the Darling Marine Centre, where, as Melissa said, there's more shellfish work. So we do some in-water work, but we also do other types of research as well. So one of the projects that we just finished was doing some consumer preference work for seaweed. It was a sea vegetable study where we were looking to see what consumers across the US, what their willingness to pay for certain types of sea vegetable products, what they're familiar with, what types of products they might be interested in, what drives their willingness to taste and try new seaweed products. So some of the work that we've been doing complements this type of farming research that Melissa's been describing.
Can you share any of the results of those? Just curious, or is that?
Carla, why don't you just introduce yourself and what you're up to, because it's crazy.
Oh, hi, I'm Carla. I'm one of Jen's students in the program. Most interested in seaweed, not exactly sure where I fit yet. I've been doing some work in Scotland, in the Outer Hebrides, with fucus species as well as sugar kelps, and also looking at dulse and working on different products using those three at the moment. So that's who I am. And I'm just really curious on what, if you might be able to share some of the results of that study, or I'd be curious.
I'll put the link into this chat for you.
Oh,
So
awesome.
I do have a full findings report that I can send to you if you're interested in, like a 40-page report which delves into the statistics. I have a summary poster which also has a little bit, summarizes some of the results. Some of the interesting stuff was about the demographics. The demographics of the people who do eat seaweed I thought was interesting. and the drive is about what would help persuade them to eat more seaweed. But you can explore it using a dashboard that we've created. So all of the data, we've surveyed 5,400 people across the United States, and all of that data has been pulled together into a dashboard that you can explore. And I'll put the link in the chat for you.
Thank you.
That's cool.
No, I'm curious about that. I wonder what the demographic trends are. Neat. Thanks, Annie. Yeah, so then we also have a business currently incubating here called Kingfish Maine, and they are growing yellowtail kingfish, or they're also known as hiramasa. They're a cereola species, and they are currently in the process of getting everything set to build a $110 million facility in Washington County, Maine, which is just really close to Canada along the coast. And they are developing their broodstock program here. So the broodstock are the parent fish that they use to collect the eggs and then grow all the stocks that they need for their farm. So they're hoping to get a head start on that, have all the broodstock producing eggs here while they build their facility. That way, when their facility is built and ready to go, they can just go right in and stock it. So they're using a ton of our space right now to do that. These are really cool fish. They do not live in Maine naturally. They are a couple of different strains. There's one from Chile, and then one from kind of the San Diego area in California. And we've had both of those here in the past. And they're really great for aquaculture. One, they're just really delicious, I think, personally. If you've ever been to a sushi restaurant and had yellowtail, that's the type of fish that you're eating. The reason that they're so great for aquaculture is that they're really fast growing. You can get a animal from egg to a size that you can sell in about a year and a half. So that's really, really quick. Their development is also really fast, which I love. It takes them from fertilization to hatch is 3 days, and from hatch to absorption of their yolk sac, so they're ready to start eating all that food, is 3 days. So they go through these processes really quickly, which when you're working in marine aquaculture, especially with cold water species, like I've spent a lot of time working with halibut and cod in the past, they have much longer larval stages. Things can go wrong after you've spent 45 days in the freezing cold, dark rooms day in, day out, trying to get these creatures to stay alive. So it's really nice with these fish move quickly through. And they have amazing fecundity. So usually we get about 200 to 500,000 eggs per batch of eggs from these fish. They do all their fertilization on their own in the tank with salmon and with halibut. All those fish, you have to physically strip the eggs and the milk, which is the sperm from the fish, and then artificially combine those in a lab setting. But the yellowtail, we just can collect fertilized eggs directly from the tank, which is great. And yeah, so like really great species. And I'm excited that they're joining Maine, because right now we are very heavily salmon as far as finfish go. But we do have a new alternative to salmon, which is a company called American Unagi, and they grow American eels to market size here in the state of Maine. They just graduated from CCAR. They're completely moved out into their own facility in Waldoboro, Maine. And they have an amazing business. So they're owned by a woman named Sarah Rademacher. A lot of Sarahs in aquaculture here in Maine. She has been working in aquaculture for a long time, and she wanted to come back to Maine and start a farm. And she was trying to think of what species would be best for her farm. And so she was thinking about things that were really like relevant fisheries to Maine. And one of them that we have here is the glass eel fishery or elver fishery. I'm not sure if you've heard of these, but these American eels, they'll go out to sea, spawn, and then the young elvers or the glass eels will come back to Maine's rivers. And it's a pretty profitable fishery here. Some of these eels go for, depending on the year, you know, $1,000, $2,000 a pound for these little toothpick sized eels. What happens with those is they get shipped to Asia typically and grown out in conditions where they're just not really traceable. There's a lot of illegal glass eel fisheries in the world. So there are also African and European eels. These are all combined in these grow out facilities. And then a small portion is shipped back to the United States to supply our domestic demand for these eels. So her thought is like, why are we going through this? These fish are not traceable at all. Why don't we just grow them in Maine? So she started in her basement and in her bathtub growing eels to see if it would work. And then she moved to the Darling Marine Center. Sorry, it's lunchtime here and they're having fun in the lunchroom down the hall from me. She moved to the Darling Marine Center, which is a smaller business incubation facility that the University of Maine has. She quickly grew out of that space, moved to CCAR, where I'm located, filled up 3 of our systems with eels, was able to get her business started, get investment, and run her business, sell eels out of this facility here, while she was building her facility in Waldoboro, which is the mid-coast region of Maine. And she just last week, she had a massive truck loaded full of eels, shipping everything down to her facility. That's all set up and running. We're pretty excited about that one. So that's another finfish. If you ever get a chance to try her eels, they're very, very good. And they're packed full of vitamin D, which I didn't know. She told me that. So good for the winter. Another company that we have here is called Sea and Reef Aquaculture. They've been here since 2012. They've been around much longer than that. That was started by a guy named Soren Hansen while he was a PhD student up on campus. And he started that in his dorm room. So there's a common theme here where people are just starting these businesses, trying them out, and then they grow. So he is now the 2nd largest producer of marine ornamentals in the United States. He ships internationally, and his mission is to reduce the fishing pressures on coral reefs by producing these ornamental fish for aquarium hobbyists. So that way they're not being removed from the reefs, which you probably know it often involves some pretty destructive methods. And then also those fish are grazers and they are essential for the health of the reefs. Another thing he does that's pretty neat is he selectively breeds the fish to produce different color morphs. So they look different than fish you find in the wild. He's produced clownfish. And if you check out their website, I think it's seaandreef.com, you'll see all these fish. So he has clownfish that are like all white with black spots. They look like cows, kind of. He has all white clownfish, all black clownfish, just really cool colors and patterns that aren't typically found in nature at all. That he's spent years and years and years developing these lines. Another cool thing about his fish is that they're all bred in captivity. So they're excited about seeing people and they want to be at the front of the aquarium to be the first to get all the food when it comes in. So they're more suited for an aquarium life than a wild caught fish would be. Yeah, so I think that's pretty much all of our industry partners that we have here at the moment. We've had several in the past as well. I'm happy to talk about those if you'd like, or if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those. Oh, you're muted, Jen.
Let's pitch to Annie for a few, and then maybe we could open it up for questions, and then we can have you keep going if we have time, but the time goes so fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll be really quick, because if I don't intentionally talk quickly, then I could talk for hours. So Maine Aquaculture Innovation Center, I think it was founded in the 1980s, and was at the time one of 9 innovation centres that was formed by the Maine state government to support development in some of our growth sectors. Many of those innovation centres are no longer with us, but the Maine Aquaculture Innovation Centre has continued to thrive, and it's small. There's myself, Chris Davis, who's the executive director, and we have a couple of members of staff working on specific projects. One of the key things that we try to do is stay abreast of the current barriers and issues that are being faced by Maine's aquaculture sector. Now, Maine's aquaculture sector is really diverse, and I think you've started to get a hint of that from Melissa. So it's shellfish, and there's multiple species of shellfish that are farmed or as emerging species. There's finfish, and that's predominantly salmon, but we have other species too, like trout, clownfish, eels, yellowtail. There's seaweed. And then there's ancillary parts of the sector that include aquatic animal health services, gear development, etc. So we can be involved in any kind of innovations that help to further the sector in Maine. So we have programs to support businesses. So those programs are things like, we've just piloted a farmer to farmer exchange program, where we provide funding for a farmer to travel to another farm to learn about something that might improve their business here in Maine. So some of those that we are supporting right now are seaweed farmers who are going to look at new processing technology in Europe, or there's another seaweed farmer who's going to be looking at technology to help monitor the growth and yield of seaweed on farms. There's a scallop farmer who's going to be going to Japan. There's an oyster farmer who's going to be going to the west coast of the United States. And they're all going with a specific purpose to try and learn something new and bring that knowledge back to Maine and to share it with other people in Maine. We also have programs to support businesses that are trying to scale up. So if they have a new innovation that they've developed in-house, we have programs to help them with that. There's the business incubation programs. But we can also offer market research support with a company called Atlantic Corporation that we're partnered with. And then so there's all this work that we do with companies that are trying to innovate or start anew in Maine. We offer training programs for new farmers. And we also have a portfolio of work that is from external grants. So we have several federally funded projects that range from looking at developing a handbook for farmers to help navigate the social license to operate for a business that's just starting on the coastline of Maine. We have quite a large project at the moment that's looking to bringing together 3 different hatcheries to try and crack the nut of growing sea scallops in hatcheries. It's a bottleneck for the growth of the sector, but the sea scallop life cycle is complicated in that planktonic phase, and it's really difficult for it to make it reproducible and successful. What else are we doing? We are working with different partners to develop toolboxes to support workforce development and growth of the sector. There's educators that we're working with. It's a really diverse portfolio. One of the projects that Chris is working on today is actually with a company called AI Tech, who are developing a mussel raft. And we're working with this company to set up a demonstration of their new raft design at the Darling Marine Centre. So we're working with them as an incubator project, but it's not an incubator in the sense that they're renting space. It's an incubator as we're helping them to set up this demonstration raft so that other mussel farmers in the state can come and see it and help advise on the design of that raft, but also to raise awareness of that type of technology under development. We have a low-cost buoy that we're working on. One of Chris's pet projects is to develop a small, low-cost buoy that can monitor temperature, salinity, chlorophyll, to some extent wave action. And we want to keep it low cost so that it is affordable for farmers to place it on their farm, with the aim to improving site selection, because site selection is crucial to the success of a grow out operation, but also to help optimize husbandry of farms that already exist. So we got some kind of engineering projects like that. And what else have we got on at the moment?
Yeah, I should say Chris is a real tinkerer, and
He's
he
a
does,
real,
because I actually took a class with him for a week, and he has a lot of kind of technology that I wouldn't say hack, but he pieces together a lot of pretty interesting things to support growing aquaculture, because he also has his own farm as well. So,
Yeah.
right.
yeah,
Annie,
that's
do
right.
you have your own farm? Do you grow anything?
I have a very small oyster farm. It's very, very small. I only farm around 30,000 oysters a year. Chris is he was one of the first oyster farmers in the state. So I don't want to call him the granddaddy, because he wouldn't like that if I did that. But he's one of the first, and was one of the definitely, if it wasn't for folk like Chris and Bill Mook, who really led the charge for oyster farming, we wouldn't be able to, people like me wouldn't be able to do it now.
Yeah,
So-
it's crazy when you look at the statistics, like the USDA's statistics on oyster farms in Maine, and the growth over the number of oyster farms in Maine that over the past 10 years, how many have been established. It's crazy. I worked with a guy, I worked actually as a bartender at a restaurant, and one of our regulars owned a big lobster pound, and he was a lobsterman, and his son was a lobsterman. And kept talking to me for years about these pounds that he has that weren't in use. He's totally converted them into an oyster farm. He has a hatchery manager. He has a whole crew of people that run this farm out of his lobster pounds. So is
that Gus Francis?
Yes, you know him.
I'm buying and selling his oysters.
Oh, you are?
Yeah,
good.
I mean, that's just one of the projects.
I think it's really cool though, because that shows
Really
like the
cool.
connection to fisheries. Like these people have this skill set, and it needs to be used. And he just had these pounds just sitting there because he didn't have the lobsters for them. And now they're being used to produce more food.
Right. And so some of the innovation isn't, this is something I find hard to describe to people who are really thinking about innovation and entrepreneurship, because a lot of our innovation isn't something that's the next multi-million-dollar piece of equipment. Innovation is about how can we leverage our existing infrastructure, because Maine has got this really long economic and cultural tradition of working on the water, and there's a lot of infrastructure that goes with that. And the fisheries have morphed through several hundred years. It's not been static, but now we're looking at a period of time when it's not moving from one species that's being fished to another species that's being fished. It's moving from fishing to farming. And so it takes a lot of social engineering and innovation to help facilitate that change. And Gus is one of those people that's really leading the way with that. And some of the other projects that we've got with lobster pounds is we're looking at working with the Down East Institute and the Sunrise County Economic Council, who are looking at mini mussel farms. So where lobstermen can have a secondary source of income from a mussel farm. And similar, maybe looking at ranching scallops in lobster pounds. And so there's lots of different examples of how we're trying to develop the aquaculture in different ways.
Mm-hmm. And I think over the past maybe 10 years or so, a lot of companies, especially land-based aquaculture companies, have wanted to locate in Maine. And I think a big part of their decision to do so is what Annie was just talking about, especially the infrastructure that we have in place for seafood distribution in Maine, which is a huge draw, because that's complicated.
There's a couple questions in the chat, so I thought maybe
Yes.
get to that. And the whole idea about kind of the social movements that need to take place is something that I thought about half an hour ago when we started the conversation. And if we have time, it'd be great to kind of get back to that and how you address that, because there's those issues everywhere. And in particular, I was in Situate last week with some lobstermen friends, and they were talking about the disaster in licensing for oyster farmers, and that Cohasset is suing Situate because they don't want to look at, like any farms in their view shed, and how the social license is a really big piece of these conversations. But before we go there, there's two questions in the chat right now, and then there might be some just in general. And the first one is from Brea, who asked if she grew up in Maine, and that in elementary school, she worked with state fisheries and local universities, and she was wondering if those programs still exist.
So I have heard of people doing that still. I'm not involved in any of that. But I do work with a group that we have been doing aquaponics in the classroom. So we've been working with local schools, K through 12 schools, and some CT, so technical training centers for high schoolers, to build aquaponics systems for their classrooms. So the students go through a whole process where they design, they submit a proposal. So they have to put together a proposal for their project with a budget. They ask for specific equipment for their system. And then we've had funding to purchase all the equipment for them. We help them get it set up, teach them about the nitrogen cycle, teach them about fish husbandry, teach them about growing plants and hydroponics, all through this. And it's just such a great model that we are really happy to put in schools, because they don't just learn about aquaculture, they learn about growing foods, they learn about project management, and they also get the experience of running their project themselves, and they feel a lot of ownership over it. And it teaches math and physics and engineering, all in one tabletop system.
And then another question was about climate change and what species are going to be most challenged. That's a
So
big.
yeah, I think ocean acidification is a huge issue for a lot of things. Specifically here at CCAR, we had a research project with Atlantic cod. Geez, I want to say 8 years ago now, maybe. And they were looking at incidents of cataract formation at different CO2 levels in the system. So we had systems set up where the CO2 or the carbon dioxide concentrations were different. And then we reared Atlantic cod in there. And it did show that the higher the CO2 levels, the more cataracts formed in the fish. So that's one thing. That was very specific. It can tie to climate change, but that was very specific to recirculating aquaculture systems, because while the fish are living and respiring in these systems, those gases can build up and cause issues like that. So they have to be remediated as through equipment in the system that's included in the system. So all of our systems here have degassing equipment that remove dissolved gases, excess dissolved gases. But then we add it back in as oxygen, so the fish can use the oxygen to grow. But I know this is a big issue with shellfish, so maybe, I don't know if Annie has anything to say about that. I'm not a shellfish person, really.
I'm not an expert on the impacts of climate change. I know that it is changing. As a farmer, I know that it's changing the type of biofouling that we have to manage. I know that many of our hatchery partners are experiencing water quality changes that is impacting larvae, and some of that's having a big impact on larvae. Thankfully, we've had a little bit of support on that though, because oyster and shellfish farms on the West Coast experienced some of those problems before we did. And so we've had support from their learning and their knowledge and the fact they've been willing to share it. Buffering, for example, seems to be important now in shellfish hatcheries when it wasn't as important in the past. It's as the water's warm, one of the positive impacts, which if you could believe there are such a thing, is that it does open up habitat for growing some of shellfish. So oysters, and whether or not they're economically viable to be farmed, is really all determined by temperature. And so in the past, we wouldn't consider farming oysters in down east Maine because it was so cold. Now, with some of the warmer winters that we've been having, it actually opens up the possibility of farming in certain spots in down east Maine. So there's quite a lot to unpack.
So we have about 10 minutes left, and I'm wondering if the folks who are here have some questions of these wonderful aquaculture folks that we have for another 10 minutes. I know Carla must. But this particular ask, you guys, for the Innovation Center came from Carla. So I'm assuming she wants to ask you guys if she's still kind of available.
Yeah, I'm about to jump on another call, but so what's the process for folks to join the incubator? Like what's the, like if I were interested in trying to figure out, you know, how I could grow something, like what is the actual process? Is there like an application process? Like, can I come and visit you? Like what?
We typically will just, so speaking for CCAR, we will talk to you over the phone, talk about your idea and what it is you want to do. From there, we can, either, or we get some ideas, that may be really great or maybe won't work here just because of the facilities that we have available. So if we do have incubation space, like currently right now, we are pretty much maxed out on our incubation space. So it depends on what you want to do. So if you wanted to do something small, we could probably accommodate that. If you wanted to do a large scale business, growing fish in giant tanks, we could probably accommodate that too. Actually, we do have some, you'll see in the videos if you watch those, we have some like 330,000 gallon recirculating tanks that are available for use, but most people don't want a 330,000 gallon tank. They want something a bit more manageable to test their idea. So you'd come to us with your idea. We'd talk it through. If it's something that we think makes sense for our facilities here, we go through a contract process. So we'll put together contracts and both sides will go through that and agree to something. So that'll state the length of your project, renewals of your lease for the spaces that you want to use, how much involvement our team will have. So whether you're leasing equipment from us or you're bringing in your own equipment to build out that space, all those things have to be considered. In addition to that, energy costs. So we are very flexible, like we're open to all ideas and how to share these costs. So in some cases, we need facility improvement. So we'll say, oh, you want to use this room? You can put the money and time into making this a better space. You can incubate there, say 5 years. And then at the end of that time, we get that improved space to use for other projects. So just things like that, but you can always just have a regular schedule, but it's very case by case basis.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
To add to that just quickly, so it very much, as Ms. Melissa said, it was very much a case by case basis because incubation is so different depending on what it is, what species you want to grow, whether you're looking to grow out or whether you're looking to do a value added product. There's so many different scenarios. So if generally speaking, but it's not that clear, it's not always this clear cut. Spinfish would go towards Melissa and Sika, and shellfish would be more Chris Davis, and he could help work that out.
And seaweed too, right? And
Yeah,
seaweed.
and seaweed and
Chris.
seaweed too.
Yeah, I mean, is there like any sort of like project work that folks have where they're looking for, folks to kind of come in and help, or
Yes. Here,
on
let
this,
me,
like
I
specifically
have
on
this queued
the
up.
side
I
that we're
wanted
gonna-
to share this. So there's a link I just shared. Oh, sorry, I sent that
Cool.
to just Annie. We're chatting behind the backs here. No.
I didn't even prep you.
So this is our, the Aquaculture Research Institute at the University of Maine offers an externship program. Because of the funding for this program, you have to be a student that's continuing on in the fall semester to be part of it. That link will explain everything. The applications, I believe, open up tomorrow. So if somebody was interested in this type of work and wanted to try it out, that externship places people with land-based recirculating companies like Kingfish Maine, like Sea and Reef Aquaculture, even just at CCAR here, but also with oyster farmers and local governments, so town offices, and you'll spend 12 weeks working on a different topic that has to do with aquaculture in Maine. And it's open to anybody, not just
So
universities.
I might find some seaweed people in there too.
Yeah, we're hoping to include a
And
seaweed
fish.
farmer with
And
this.
another there's a couple of other opportunities as well. There's a brand new one called Aquaculture Pioneers, which is through the Maine Career Catalyst program that's coordinated by Educate Maine. Then there's also Innovate for Maine, which is run through the Foster Center for Innovation at the University of Maine. The Foster Center, they offer, I think it's around 30 fellowships per year. And it's a process where businesses apply, they have a project that they have in mind, usually some kind of innovation or entrepreneurial project, and students apply, and then it's a matchmaking process. The Aquaculture Pioneers is slightly different, and that's more about embedding people in a business so that they can get hands-on experience of doing work in aquaculture. And so that's more like being on a farm, being a farmhand, rather than doing an entrepreneurial project.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh, and there's one other question in the chat. I don't know if you guys can see it. I mean, it's probably for Annie. With regards to oyster farming and the increased temperatures allowing for growth in Maine, has there been any coordination and communication with Chesapeake, Maryland? I know that oysters are a large portion of Maryland's aquaculture farms.
So there's a the sector is quite connected across the Northeast. So I suspect that there are people in the sector in Maine who are connecting with people in Chesapeake and Maryland communities. I don't know specifically what that is myself, but I'm sure that there are people doing it. When I say about the temperature increasing allowed for growth, that's really just some basic biology of oysters, and that they eat phytoplankton, and so the amount of phytoplankton that they eat, their pumping rate is directly correlated to the temperature of the water. So if the water temperature is higher, they will pump more, they will grow faster. So in down East Maine, it's not that oysters couldn't live. They could, they absolutely can, and there are pockets of wild oysters along the coastline, but you were looking at a 5 to 6 year grow out period, which is really difficult to be economically viable. What you want is more of a 2 to 3 years at the most. Some places on the Gulf Coast, you're looking at around 18 months. I don't know what it is in Chesapeake and Maryland, but I'm going to guess it's 18 months to 2 years. So, but with the warming temperatures, what you're getting is more likelihood of having economically viable oyster businesses down east.
Great. So we're almost at 1. Does anyone have any other questions? This has been really awesome, you guys. Thank you so much. Even without, I'm glad almost that the video wasn't working, because it gave us more times more time to chat with you and to really kind of dig in a little bit more. No other
Of course,
questions?
you're welcome.
No, will you guys, I'm sure I'll get an email of someone wanting to email you. So are you guys comfortable sharing your emails?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Maybe you want to put them in the chat. And then of course I'll share them for anyone else.
I'll do it, but on the understanding that next week I might not reply because I'll be on vacation.
Yay.
Any place fun?
Oh yeah, I'm going to Blue Grass Festival on the beach in Mexico, and
Oh.
I'm only, I'm just a little bit excited. I started packing this morning.
You sound it.
I'm dreaming of that kind of
I'm
rum in
a little jealous.
Yeah. That's great. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, both Melissa and Annie. It's great. And Melissa, it's nice to meet you face to face.
Yes. Yeah,
Annie
thank
and
you for having us.
Annie and I try and cause trouble on occasion. So I'll be talking to you when you get back from Mexico.
Yeah, sure thing. Will you be in Milford, Jen?
I don't know yet.